Guys, we have made it. We're 1 day away from the 2024 NFL Draft. The wait is almost over. And hopefully I can hold you guys over a little bit longer because I've got a couple more draft-related videos here on the channel. An exercise that I like to do every year is my what I would do mock draft. Not necessarily what I'm predicting will happen. I'll have one final first-round predictive mock tomorrow morning. But this is what I would do if I was the general manager of all 32 teams. What everybody's current draft projection and draft consensus rankings are, throw it out the window. This is based on my personal evaluation of all 32 teams and the prospects in this year's draft class. So obviously, me and you are not going to agree on everything. And that's fine. That's the fun part of the draft. In the description, I have my tentative top 100 big board. I may make some switches to the order of the players before the draft starts tomorrow, but the list in the description is generally what my top 100 will look like going into the draft. So if you want to follow along with that as we go through today's mock draft. And with that, we won't waste any more time and we'll get this show on the road. As you'll notice here, there are no trades. So keep that in mind as we go along here through these first two rounds. We'll start with the Bears at number 1. I believe that they should pick Caleb Williams. Pretty set in stone here. This has been the pick since they clinched the number 1 pick back in December. This is always what they should have done, and this is always what they will do. The draft starts at 2 with the Washington Commanders. I've seen some rumors of people questioning if they're going to move out of this pick. That's not happening. I don't know how there was any noise of that yesterday. But Washington has said they will stick with the second pick because obviously they're not moving out. The real question is which quarterback is it going to be, Drake Maye or Jayden Daniels? And the closer we get to the draft, the less confident I am on who it will be. However, I am very confident on who it should be. I believe that Drake Maye is considerably the second best quarterback in this draft class, and I think as a prospect he is a lot closer to Caleb Williams than he is to Jayden Daniels. And that is no slight to Caleb Williams for what it's worth. That's just how big I view the gap between Drake Maye and Jayden Daniels. I like the upside that Drake Maye possesses as a passer. Jayden Daniels has, I think, the higher floor because of his ability as a runner, but his frame concerns me a little bit. He doesn't use the middle of the field. Late breakout age isn't ideal either. Drake Maye just checks a lot more boxes for me, and because of that, he's the quarterback I would pick here at 2 if I was the Washington Commanders. I don't want to spoil where I think I'm going to have them go in my final predictive mock draft tomorrow, but this is what I would do if I was Washington. Pick 3 is where we really get hot, because presumably this pick probably will be whichever quarterback is left of Drake Maye or Jayden Daniels. Maybe New England throws a wrench and picks J.J. McCarthy, but I don't have them picking a quarterback. Instead, I had them picking who I believe is the best football player in this draft, and that's Marvin Harrison Jr., the wide receiver out of Ohio State. So the reason why I don't have New England picking a quarterback is not so much because they don't need one. I think they obviously do. But I don't like any of the quarterbacks enough to pick them here at 3. If it was a team like Minnesota here, who I think is a much better position with a proven play caller and a much better offensive infrastructure, then I think I would be a lot more comfortable picking Jayden Daniels or J.J. McCarthy here. But with New England, this is year 1 of the rebuild, new coaching staff, the offensive line is questionable, the receiving core is awful. I believe that getting a guy like Marvin Harrison, who's a blue-chip receiver prospect, is the best move here for New England if they don't find a trade. There are no trades here because if they were, I think this would be an easy trade down slot. I personally believe New England will stay and pick a quarterback tomorrow night, but I'm not sure if that's what they should do unless Drake Maye falls. Then in that case, run the card up. That'll bring up Arizona at 4. They get Malik Nabers, wide receiver out of LSU. Unironically, I think the actual draft tomorrow is going to work out a lot better for Arizona than this scenario because I think Marvin Harrison will fall to the 4th pick, and I think when it's all said and done, Marvin Harrison will be going to the Arizona Cardinals. But he's not on the board here, so they're going to have to settle for Malik Nabers. I think he's the best player left, and again, they can't move back. Malik Nabers is a very good consolation prize, though. I'm pretty sure I have him either 2nd or 3rd on my final board, so he's just as talented of a player as Marvin Harrison Jr., and he'll be the new wide receiver 1 for Kyler Murray. That'll bring up the Chargers at 5, and similarly, I think tomorrow night is going to go a lot better for the Chargers than this scenario, because they'll either probably have Malik Nabers fall to them, or the more likely scenario is that they'll be able to get a trade back. Well, neither of those are possible here. I think given this scenario, if the Chargers can't move down, I could very well see this being Joe Alt, the tackle out of Notre Dame. I would prefer Rome Odunze, though, because I think he's slightly the better prospect. Obviously, receiver is a huge need on this roster. That can't go understated. I get that they have Greg Roman, who notoriously has not gotten the most out of his wide receivers, but you're making a draft pick here for the next 10 years, and realistically, Greg Roman's not going to be the offensive coordinator for 10 years, so I'm not entirely sure if you should base your decision-making off of that. And I think in terms of value and need, Odunze is the best player on the board here for the Chargers. At pick 6, this is where I have Jayden Daniels going to the New York Giants. I thought about passing on him again. The question is, there isn't really another obvious pick here for the Giants because the 3 receivers are all gone. Joe Alt, I guess, would work, but other than that, there's nobody else who really would make sense. I trust Brian Daboll a whole lot more than I trust the New England coaching staff to develop Jayden Daniels, and I get that the Giants' weaponry and offensive line, like New England's, is also fairly questionable, but I believe in this coaching staff to be able to give him the best opportunity to hit his ceiling, which I can't really say the same about New England or Washington. The Titans here at 7. If Joe Alt is on the board, he will be the pick. Pretty easy. Let's move on. With the 8th pick, the Atlanta Falcons, I had them selecting the top defensive player off the board, and it's Latu out of UCLA. I think most people would expect this to be Dallas Turner, and I think there is a high chance it will be Dallas Turner if Atlanta stays with this pick. But I think Latu makes slightly more sense for them because I think he's a little bit better. Atlanta is trying to win now. They are the favorite in that division and could contend in the NFC. Dallas Turner definitely has the higher ceiling, and I think Atlanta is one of the best landing spots for him to develop. And if they do pick Dallas Turner here, I don't think that would be a bad selection at all. However, I think Latu is the slightly better prospect. I think the athletic limitations with him have been overstated, and it seems like the medical prognosis has come back all clear regarding his neck. With that being the case, I think Atlanta should make him the top defensive player off the board, and I think he can be one of the missing pieces to this roster. I've seen the Bears heavily linked with Byron Murphy over the last couple of days, and as a fan of the team in the NFC North, I really hope this does not happen. But being that I am the GM of the Bears here, this is the pick I'm going to give them. They drafted Gervin Dexter and Zach Pickens in day 2 last year, but adding a blue chipper up front, such as Byron Murphy, I think makes a lot of sense for what the Bears should do and what the Bears will end up doing, especially if Rome Odunze does not fall here. So I think this would be an outstanding pick for Chicago. Byron Murphy is an absolute game wrecker, and him on that defense alongside Montez Sweat I think would be really fun. The Jets at 10, this was a tough one for me. I really thought about the offensive tackles, and I don't think picking someone like Amarius Mims or Olu Fashanu would be a bad idea at all. But I had them selecting Brock Bowers because as part of being the Jets general manager, I have to realize that I have to deal with the prima donna that is Aaron Rodgers, and realistically, he is going to want Brock Bowers here. I also think this pick gives him the best chance to contend this year. When is the last time the Jets have been true contenders? I think adding pieces to help this roster win now is the right way to go. Adding another big-time weapon in the passing game along with Garrett Wilson and Mike Williams very well could be the way to go. I'd love to see the Jets move up for Rome Odunze, but being that he went off the board at pick 5, and there's also no trades to begin with, this is the next best scenario. Minnesota at 11. I'm so used to having them move up, but with no trades, they stick at 11, and they get J.J. McCarthy. I don't mind them moving up for McCarthy at all, but with the quarterbacks falling a little bit, it works out here for Minnesota because they don't have to move up and they'll get him. I don't think this is how it's going to play out tomorrow night because I think the quarterbacks are going to go earlier, which means presumably Minnesota or somebody else is going to have to move up for McCarthy. But now Minnesota gets to keep their 2 first-round picks and they still add JJ. That'll bring us to the Broncos at 12. I had them selecting Bo Nix, the quarterback out of Oregon. I think Bo Nix, for me, is in the same tier as a prospect to that of Jayden Daniels and J.J. McCarthy. And it might be that I'm a little bit lower on those two, but also I feel like I'm a little bit higher on Bo Nix than the consensus. Everybody wants to point out how he's a screen merchant, and he blossomed late. The latter might be true, but I'm not too worried about the short passes because we saw Bo Nix often look for the deep ball last year where he was rather effective. He's got the physical tools and he's got the character to suggest that he can be a franchise quarterback in this league, and being developed by Sean Payton I think would be a home run. The Broncos cannot go into next year with their current quarterback room because none of those guys are good enough to start. I think Bo Nix can be, and this would be the right move for Denver. At 13, I've got the Raiders picking Amarius Mims, a player who I am very high on. I have him as my second offensive tackle in this class. I get he hasn't played a ton of football, but when he's been on the field, he's been really damn good. I was torn between him and Quinyon Mitchell here, but I think the upside with Mims might be too much to pass up, and I think this would be a phenomenal pick for the Raiders. Olu Fashanu goes to the Saints here at pick 14. The Saints need offensive tackle really bad. The Trevor Penning pick, which I hated at the time, well, that has been even worse than I could have imagined. Ryan Ramczyk on the right side, unclear if he's going to play this year due to injury. They need 2 tackles, so they've got to get one here in the first round, and lucky for them, we've only had 2 go off the board so far. I think that Olu Fashanu is the best pass protector in this class and would be a good fit for the New Orleans offense. Quinyon Mitchell slipping all the way to 15 is a crime, but I had other teams prioritizing other areas. I thought about him as high as pick 8, but this works out for the Colts. My number 1 defensive player is off the board here to Indianapolis. If he does fall this far tomorrow night, I think this would be a slam dunk for the Colts if this is the route they go with. And then Jackson Powers Johnson to the Seahawks. I don't think JPJ will end up going this high, but I think he's good enough to do so. Whether it's at center or guard, he's played both at a very high level. And Seattle could use both spots, along with possibly tackle. I thought about Graham Barton here as well, but I very slightly prefer Jackson Powers Johnson, and I think this would be a great selection for Seattle. I'm going to have the Jaguars picking Terrion Arnold, the cornerback out of Alabama. Really good athlete, dynamic ball skills, good in zone coverage. I think this would be a good pick here for Jacksonville. He is my second corner in the class. There were a couple other players I thought about. I was tempted by adding Brian Thomas Jr. to this offense, but I think the value of Arnold is going to be too much to pass up. Taliese Fuaga, tackle out of Oregon State to the Bengals. I'm not sure if he's going to play tackle or guard here at the next level, but regardless, the value is too much to pass up, and it definitely fits a need. Dallas Turner, finally off the board here to the Rams. It's not that I'm lower on Dallas Turner. It's just that there were other picks that I preferred over the last 10 selections. And again, I mentioned him as a possibility at pick 8. And if Atlanta did that, I'd have no problem with it at all. He falls all the way to 19, where the Rams are going to pick him and run this one to the bank. One of the biggest steals of the first round so far. I think I have him 11th or 12th on my board. And positional value, if you add that in, he is high positional value being an edge rusher. It's just that there were better picks for some of these other teams. But this really works out for the Rams, adding a dynamic pass rusher to the arsenal. Troy Fautanu, offensive tackle out of Washington to the Pittsburgh Steelers. He's got tackle and guard experience, 2 areas that the Steelers could look to improve. Now you have the option to keep Broderick Jones at right tackle or slide him over to left. I think Jones and Fautanu both are going to have the versatility to play on either end of the line. Graham Barton out of Duke goes to the Dolphins. He's mostly played left tackle with the Blue Devils, but he can play guard, he can play center. The Dolphins have a few holes on the offensive line. They can try him in a couple different spots and see where they like him the most. Kool-Aid McKinstry, cornerback out of Alabama to the Philadelphia Eagles. A very technically refined, solid corner. I think he's been slept on a little bit here in the draft process, and he will end up just barely as my CB3, a hair ahead of Cooper DeJean. With James Bradbury and Darius Slay getting older, the Eagles need to replenish in the secondary. Both of those guys showed signs of age last year, and I think this would be a home run pick. Johnny Newton goes to the Minnesota Vikings. They get to keep their second first-round pick and add a guy in Newton who could have been in the conversation for the 11th pick if they didn't need a quarterback. Now, I don't really know where Newton's stock is going to truly be. Pretty much every draft media talking head has suggested that he should go in the first round, but from what I've seen, the league might be lower on him than the media, partly because of the foot injury he suffered at the end of the year. But nonetheless, I think he belongs in the first round, and I think the value here with Minnesota would be pretty good. J.C. Latham to the Dallas Cowboys at 24. I think he's definitely going to go earlier than this, but I'm not as high on Latham as others. I prefer the offensive tackles who have gone ahead of him. I think this is a good landing spot, though, especially considering the Cowboys' high track record of developing offensive linemen. I'm not entirely sure if you'd keep Latham at tackle or switch him over to guard. They're considering moving Tyler Smith from guard to tackle. So 2 guys who are not entirely dissimilar in the sense of they're 2 good players, but you don't really know where you're going to play them, and you'll have time in training camp to figure it out. Cooper DeJean off the board here to the Green Bay Packers at 25. Will he play safety? Will he play outside corner? Will he play slot corner? That's to be determined. Based on one of the Packers' second-round picks, safety's going to be out of the picture most likely. He'll probably play somewhere at corner. I think he'll be able to play on the outside as well as the slot effectively. So regardless of how Green Bay uses him, I think he's going to be a good player. Jared Verse, I feel like probably should not fall this far, but with Dallas Turner dropping, it seems like the edge rushers have all kind of slipped a little bit. The Buccaneers will gladly capitalize, though, picking him here at 26. This has been a pretty common meeting of player and team recently, and I think it's one that makes a lot of sense. Chop Robinson goes to the Cardinals here at 27. I feel like this doesn't necessarily do my edge rankings justice because I think Jared Verse is closer to the top two of Latu and Turner than he is to anybody else, including Chop Robinson. But with Verse slipping, he has to deal with that. While the Cardinals, I think Chop Robinson makes a lot of sense for them. Jonathan Gannon has developed these raw edge rushers in the past. He was able to get the most out of Hassan Reddick in Philadelphia, and now he's going to look to do so with Chop Robinson, who's got some question marks. He's not fully refined, but the upside with him is absolutely there. Brian Thomas Jr. finally off the board of the Bills. He probably should not fall this far, but again, there were just other picks that I preferred. I thought about him as early as 17 with the Jacksonville Jaguars. He could have worked with the Steelers. I really thought about him with the Dallas Cowboys. I think that would have been a really fun pick. But it works out for the Bills because he falls all the way here, and Buffalo's able to pick him without trading up. I don't think this is quite possible for the Bills to get this lucky tomorrow night, but nonetheless, this would be a slam dunk for them. Nate Wiggins out of Clemson goes to the Lions. I don't think the Lions are going to really like Nate Wiggins, and I think they're definitely going to prefer other guys here. But I would be enamored enough with the upside to take a shot on him at the back end of the first round, because if he was 20 pounds bigger and did not have health question marks, I think he would be the best defensive prospect in this draft. But those question marks are obviously pretty severe. I think somebody like Kool-Aid McKinstry or Cooper DeJean would probably be a lot more likely for Detroit, and I would probably prefer either of those guys. But they're both off the board. I think Nate Wiggins, if he hits his ceiling, could be a dynamic piece in this secondary, and I think this would be a good pick for the Lions, given how the board is played out. Mike Sainristil to the Ravens here in the first round. This might be a little bit early for some. I get that Sainristil isn't the biggest, but I think as a slot corner, he's going to be one of the more impactful rookie defenders in this draft class. And of course, he's got the hardball familiarity going from Jim to John. Tyler Guyton goes to the Niners here at 31. Not a player I'm sold on, but I think San Francisco would be able to develop him. They wouldn't have to rush him in right away, and eventually he could slide in at right tackle or be the true replacement for Trent Williams down the line at left tackle. And then at 32, the Chiefs pick Adonai Mitchell out of Texas. I have Ladd McConkey ranked higher, but I would prefer Mitchell here for the Chiefs because if he hits his ceiling, my God, that would be frightening. I think Ladd McConkey is the safer pick, and I think he is a guy who would fit with the Chiefs offense pretty well, but I'd like to see them take a big swing here with the upside that Adonai Mitchell brings to the table. I think this would be a home run pairing of team and player, and if this does happen tomorrow night, if I was an AFC rival, I'd be pretty worried. Now into the second round, we'll start with the Panthers here at 33. A common pairing of team and player that I've had throughout this process is Ladd McConkey going to Carolina, and it's one that I think makes a lot of sense. Arguably the best route runner in this class, the kid knows how to get open, and Bryce Young needs receivers who are steady and consistent. This New England pick was a tough one for me, but I am going to give them Michael Penix Jr. because I do believe here in the second round this is appropriate value for him. And the gap between him and, say, Jayden Daniels, who they could have picked at 3, really isn't that big for me. I obviously have made it clear I'm not a huge Jayden Daniels guy. I would rather wait until the second round where I can get Michael Penix and say he's off the board. We can just wait for the future. We don't have to force the issue. Cooper Beebe to the Arizona Cardinals here at 35. Definitely one of my biggest sleepers of this draft class. I think he will end up going to the second round, but it's just that nobody's really talked about him. I think this is where his range should be, and I think he'll be able to start pretty early on for Arizona. Xavier Worthy to the Washington Commanders here at pick 36. Worthy is not just speed. He's been a really solid starting receiver for Texas over the last 3 years. You can have him in the slot or on the outside. You can also kick Jahan Dotson inside if necessary. And along with Terry McLaurin, this receiving core looks really nice for Drake Maye. Javon Bullard. He is my top-ranked safety. I think he's a guy who could surprise people with how early he goes. He'll end up here at 37 to the Los Angeles Chargers. Jesse Minter might be able to use him as his own version of Mike Sainristil because I think Bullard will be able to play the nickel at a pretty high level, and I think this would be a fun pick. Darius Robinson to the Titans has been another common pairing of player and team, and it's one that, again, I think makes a lot of sense. The Titans lost to Nico Autry in the offseason, somebody who's got inside-outside flexibility, and Darius Robinson, I think, would be able to overtake that role pretty nicely. Kamari Lassiter to the Panthers here at 39. The launch speed is a concern, but I think he's a great player. And Carolina could use some more help at corner. They don't really have a whole lot other than J.C. Horn, and he's a medical question mark to begin with. And then at 40, Washington gets Jordan Morgan to help out the offensive line. Will it be as a tackle or a guard? That's to be determined. But nonetheless, I think this is good value here at 40. And Washington's done a great job of adding to the offense to help their rookie quarterback. Green Bay is going to double down in the secondary. I've got them picking Tyler Nubin out of Minnesota. So the plan is that Nubin and McKinney will be in the back end, and Cooper DeJean, as I mentioned, will mostly play corner. Tyler Nubin's an interesting player because he didn't test all that well athletically, but he's been a really good player for Minnesota over the last few years. Really, really good cover safety. This Green Bay secondary looks really solid. Now that they're in a division where they have to play against Caleb Williams, J.J. McCarthy, and a really strong Lions passing offense, they're going to need some more guys in the back end, and I think this draft would suit them well. Max Melton to the Texans here at 42. He's got inside-outside flexibility. Another guy who I think will go earlier than people expect. I think this would be very appropriate range for him. Tyke Smith to the Falcons, one of my favorite players in this draft class. He's another guy who's got ultra versatility in the back end. You can put him in the slot or back as a safety. Atlanta could use another playmaker in that secondary, and that's exactly what Tyke Smith is. Junior Colson is my number one linebacker in this class. I really like his instinctiveness, his polish and coverage. He's solid in the run game. He's going to go to the Raiders here at pick 44 above the other top linebackers, as I think he is the better prospect. The Raiders could use some more guys in the middle, and I think the value here with Junior Colson is absolutely appropriate. Let's finally get our run on receivers. Keon Coleman, Xavier Legette, and Troy Franklin all flying off the board, and Ricky Pearsall is going to join these guys soon. We'll start with Coleman. He goes to the New Orleans Saints here at 45. Gives them something they don't really already have in this offense. A big-bodied weapon who is dangerous with the ball in his hands. I think him, Olave, and Shaheed would be a really fun trio. Xavier Legette goes to the Colts. Another guy who is a rock star with the football. A late bloomer, fifth-year senior who finally put it all together this year. But I think the value here at 46 would be quite good for Indy. Zach Frazier to the Giants. I'm a little bit lower on him than consensus, but I think he's still a good player, whether it's at center or guard. I think he's going to be quite solid. Presumably, he would probably start at guard, given that they drafted John Michael Schmitz in the second round last year. And then Troy Franklin going to the Jaguars. I get that they signed Gabe Davis, but I think they could use another outside vertical threat in the passing game. They can't go into the year with just the current group of guys they have at receiver, and I think Troy Franklin would be a fun addition to that offense as they really look to get the deep passing game to be a big strength. Marshawn Kneeland off the board here to the Bengals here at 49. I think he will go earlier than this, and he is ranked in the mid-30s in my rankings. Again, it's just based on how the board played out, and I felt that there were other picks elsewhere that I preferred. But this would be a great pick here for Cincinnati. Kneeland's got a relentless motor, really performed well at the Senior Bowl, high production at Western Michigan, and I think he'd be a nice fit on that defensive line. Ricky Pearsall going to the Philadelphia Eagles here at pick 50. You've got A.J. Brown and Devontae Smith on the outside, but this team needs a wide receiver 3. Plug Ricky Pearsall into the slot, and this now becomes one of, if not the best, wide receiver trio in the league, giving themselves another weapon in the passing game to work with. Andrew Phillips out of Kentucky goes to the Steelers. They need another corner pretty badly. Phillips is a guy who, again, kind of a late bloomer, but really performed well down the stretch last year. Another guy with inside-outside flexibility, and I think here at 51, this would be good value. Blake Fisher, one of the more underrated players in the class, goes to the Rams. I think he's going to be a really solid tackle right off the bat, and I think there's going to be a big drop-off here with tackle. After him, we've got guys like Kingsley Su'a-Matea, Patrick Paul, and others, but I think this is really where we start to see a drop-off, and the Rams want to make sure they get one now. Peyton Wilson to the Eagles here at 53. I'm a little bit lower on him than consensus. Obviously, the medical is a question mark. He's a slightly older prospect, but he's a fun player who flies around the field, and I think he'd be a really good fit for that Eagles defense. And then Edgerrin Cooper, the other talented linebacker, still left on the board, goes to the Cleveland Browns. I think he's a very different player to that of Jeremiah Owusu-Koramoah, and I think the two of them would really complement each other nicely, and I think that'd be really fun in the middle of that Browns defense. Rook Oro'oro goes to the Dolphins, replacing their Clemson defensive tackle Christian Wilkins with another one. Oro'oro, I think, is one of the more underrated players in this class. Really solid player with Clemson over the last couple of years. I think this will be a good pick for them. And then Jonathan Brooks goes to the Cowboys, another common pairing of player and team. For a while, I've had Trey Benson as my RB1, and I've got them right next to each other on my final board, but I just very so slightly would prefer Brooks here, especially considering the Cowboys doctors were the ones who performed the ACL surgery. So if I'm the GM of the Cowboys and I get the green light from the doctors who performed the operation, then I would make him the top running back off the board here. But if they pick Trey Benson over him, I would have no problem with it whatsoever because Trey Benson is also really good. Now on to the final 8 picks of the day. We'll start with the Buccaneers, who of course drafted Cody Mauch in the 2nd round last year, but I think they could use another guy along the interior of the offensive line. They're going to go with Christian Haynes, who falls a little bit farther than he probably should, but I think this is great value here for the Bucs. Kingsley Suamataia to the Green Bay Packers. I would have thought about one of the linebackers here, but with Wilson and Cooper off the board, they're going to go with Suamataia. Tackle's not necessarily a huge need for Green Bay, but they've developed offensive line very well, and with Suamataia being raw, he'll be able to sit behind the guys they currently have. He's got some positional flexibility. He can play tackle and guard, something that the Packers highly value, but with his size and length, I think he'll be able to stick at tackle, and with the Packers' development history, I think this will be a great pick. Chris Jenkins goes to the Texans here at 59, another piece to the defense. The offense appears to be pretty complete. I wouldn't mind them adding a running back. I've had them pick Jalen Wright in the 3rd round before, so if I continued this mock draft into the 3rd round, he would probably be my next target if I was the Texans. But I think for now, focus on the defensive line, add a guy here in Chris Jenkins, who I think would be a really good fit for them. Malik Mustafa out of Wake Forest, the safety to the Bills. I think he's quite underrated, and I think that's because of his floor. I think he's going to be really good right off the bat. The Bills need starters in the secondary. They completely revamped that unit, and I think Mustafa is, for me, very clearly the best safety left. Jalen Polk off the board here to the Lions, getting a big-bodied receiver to replace Josh Reynolds with his big catch radius and high wingspan. I think this is the missing piece for the Lions offense. They could go receiver in round 1, but I think waiting until the 2nd round to get a guy like Jalen Polk and focusing on the defensive side of the ball in the 1st round probably makes more sense. Patrick Paul to the Ravens here at 62. I think Paul's going to go earlier than this because of his size, length, and upside. I'm not as high on him as others, but I think here at the end of the 2nd round, I wouldn't have a problem with this at all. Renardo Green to the Niners, a defensive back who I really like. He's got corner safety flexibility, and he gives the Niners a versatile chess piece in the back end of the secondary. And then to wrap things up, Dominic Pooney goes to the Kansas City Chiefs, staying not too far away, coming from Kansas. He can play just about any position on the offensive line, and I think he is underrated by the NFL and the media. I think he's going to be a really good player at the next level. It's just a matter of where he's going to play on the offensive line. So that'll wrap up the episode. I hope you guys enjoyed. Let me know what you like and dislike about my annual What I Would Do mock draft down below in the comments. My final predictive mock, of course, coming tomorrow. Make sure to leave a like and subscribe to the channel. Peace out.